Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here with you, even virtually, to celebrate the life of my friend Raymond Deeg. A life truly worth celebrating indeed. I'm Jim Molbreak, and I've been a friend of Ray's for a long time now, over 40 years, as a matter of fact. And I must tell you that I'm not an expert on many things in life, but I think that the senior flight attendant, Ann Sharp Deeg, would probably agree that I'm pretty much an expert on Raymond J. Deeg, Jr. And although I never called him Ray, it was always Arnold Palmer or Pom Pom. And of course, I'm better known in the Deeg household as Tragic. A little more on that later. But I want to take some time and share some thoughts and memories of Ray from a fellow who shared his love of airplanes and airlines and procedures and golf over the last 40 years or so. So let's begin at the beginning. Pretty good place to start, I think. I was introduced to Ray in the early summer of 1980 by Ben Hogan. That's Ben Hogan, that's right. Head golf professional, Turnberry Country Club, Crystal Lake, Illinois, where Ray played golf. And I was a new member at the time, and when the head professional found out that I was an airline pilot, he said, well, you have to meet Mr. Deeg. You know, I must introduce you to Mr. Deeg. And so a short time later, he did just that, and I can still remember the first time that I laid eyes on Ray. He was a bit from a distance, and he stood there, and he was absolutely radiant in his comportment, in his posture. He was impeccable in his grooming, in his clothing, in his color coordination, right down to his golf bag. Everything about Ray was just so. And folks, that's exactly the way he wanted it. And so out of that introduction, a friendship grew. We had obvious common interests. And, you know, he was a little older, and I was the kid, and he was a Czech airman at Eastern at the time, and he was a better golfer. So I'm sure I looked up to him. And, you know, my wife even said that he taught me how to dress, and it was about time that somebody took on that task. So he did that, and I did look up to him. And Ray's life at the time consisted pretty much of playing golf at Turnberry and flying Eastern airplanes out of Chicago. And if he wasn't doing one, he was doing the other. And he was pretty well known around the club. In fact, my experience with Ray was that whatever club he was in whatever town he was in, he tended to create quite a stir. And certainly that was the case at Turnberry. And, you know, he always said that golf is the greatest individual participation sport known to man. And it's like life itself. It's inherently unfair, and it's never mastered. And I think he wanted to pull some of that drama of those television broadcasts, of those thrilling tournaments, down to where we lived, worked, and played. You know, so he would assign professional PGA Tour names to our people, to the guys in our group, so that we could kind of live vicariously as the rich and famous, which we were not, by the way. So, of course, he was Arnold Palmer, and we humored him. I mean, that's all we called him, was Arnold Palmer, or Pom Pom. And the head golf professional was indeed Ben Hogan. His name might have been Ralph Bakke, I really can't remember, but he was known as Ben Hogan. And we had Lanny Watkins, we had Curtis Strange, we had Ben Crenshaw in our group. You know, we even had a fellow with a pretty good-looking set of legs for a guy. And Palmer gave him the name Nancy Lopez, and he actually answered to it, you know. And it's my understanding here that we've got the great New Zealander, Frank Nobilo, among us in the audience, so a tip of the cap to Frank. And I, of course, I was Tom Weisskopf. At least I was for a while, until an incident in a greenside bunker at the Turnberry Country Club. And I got in the bunker, and I couldn't get out of the bunker. And I hit it a couple of times, and I chunked it, and it stayed in the bunker. And finally, I just lost it, and I started swinging that club back and forth like this. And finally, it just a cloud of fury and sand and dust. And finally, I bellied the ball about 50 yards over the green. And watching this very, very keenly from greenside is Arnold Palmer, you know, because it thrills him to no end. It just, to the depths of his soul, to watch somebody else explode and blow their stack. And that's what happened to me. Well, a couple of days later, I get a letter in the mail from Ray. And inside the envelope is a 2-page article from Golf Digest. And the article is entitled, Tom Weisskopf, The Towering Inferno. And referring to my incident, obviously. But in the text of the article, the author refers to Weisskopf as a tragic golf figure. And I'm sure what he meant was that Weisskopf never lived up to his potential. But nonetheless, I became, not Weisskopf anymore, I'm now tragic. As in, Who'd you play with? Played with Tragic. Who's on the phone? Tragic. Tell him I'll call him back. Call Tragic, see if he wants to go out to dinner. You know, so I just became Tragic, and that was it. In the Deeg household, that's who I am. So, and this is important about Ray. This is really important about Ray because while he loved to see other people explode, and he did, he had an incredible ability to control his own emotions. I mean, through the ups and the downs of all the things that happen on a golf course that make people mad, they all happened to Ray. I just never saw him lose or show his emotions. In other words, he'd refer to himself in the third person. And if he had maybe a 3-4 foot putt, just a clutch putt that he really needed, you know, he'd putt it and he'd say, he misses, and he'd go tap it in. Or he makes, and he'd pick it up, take it out of the cup, and he'd walk on, always referring to himself in the third person. And he'd always say, never too up, never too down. And that's exactly the way he was, you know. And I'm going to interject here with a verse from Scripture because it's important and it's the essence of Ray. The book of Proverbs, chapter 16, says, he who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit is better than he who takes a city. And what the text is telling us here, what it's really trying to impress upon us, is just how difficult it is for a man to rule over his own spirit. And I want to tell you, folks, Ray was able to rule over his own spirit. You see, anger would have shown weakness, and he simply would have none of that. In fact, a little anecdote, if somebody was conversing with him and they would apologize to him, he'd stop them many times and he'd say, you know what John Wayne said, don't you? And he said, no, I don't know what John Wayne say. John Wayne said, never apologize. It's a sign of weakness. Well, I don't particularly agree with that, but I like the humor, and I've used it 100 times. So you all use that too sometime. Never apologize. It's a sign of weakness. And you think about Ray when you do it. But the only thing Ray liked better than watching a guy blow his top is if he had had some little subtle connection to help cause it, you know. And honestly, he was pretty doggone good at that too. So never too up, never too down. We ask no quarter, and we give none. I heard those sayings so many times over the years. That was the essence of Arnold Palmer on the golf course and beyond. Well, Chicago ended up closing, for me anyway, I think downsizing for Ray. We both left Chicago in the mid-'80s. We both ended up in Atlanta, and we weren't at the same golf course anymore, same golf club anymore, but we kept in contact, obviously. We didn't play as much anymore, but always in contact. And my employer, Republic Airlines, was struggling, and as was Eastern Airlines, both struggling as a result of the deregulation that occurred back in 1978. And all of a sudden, Republic Airlines gets bought out by the local hometown carrier of Minneapolis, Minnesota, Northwest Airlines. And I can still remember the telephone conversation over 35 years ago in my kitchen in Atlanta, and I'm telling Ray, you know, I came from a smaller company, and you know, it was kind of a close-knit culture. People knew everybody, and kind of a family-type culture. And now we're going to get bought out, we're going to get merged, we're going to get big, we'll just become a number, and we'll lose that close-knit feeling. So it's kind of sad. And Ray said, and this is verbatim, the only thing sad about this is that it happened to you and not me. And you know what, folks? He was spot on correct, but I honestly didn't know it at the time. But he absolutely turned out to be prescient with that statement. So during that time in Atlanta, when we did play golf, and occasionally we would, I met another Eastern pilot, a guy named Mike. Palmer called him Little Mikey, and he had given him the tour name Lanny Watkins. And Mike was a fairly senior co-pilot in Atlanta. He'd flown with all the captains in the base, and for some reason he took me aside, and I don't know why in particular, but he took me aside and he said, you know, I fly with all these guys and everything goes along pretty routine, but when I fly with Ray, everything has to be done just so. Has to be done just so. And he said it in an admiring way. And that was the essence of Ray. I will tell you, Ray used to say, we do it the same way, every time, day or night, night or day. IFR, VFR. That means in the clear or in the clouds. Observer or no observer, we do it the same way every time. And folks, that's a pretty good definition of professionalism. And I'm here to tell you, I can stand in front of you and say that Captain Raymond Deeg was the embodiment of professionalism in airline piloting. It wasn't a job to him. It was a calling. It was a brotherhood. And he did it the right way all the time, every single time. That was Ray Deeg. Well, during that time in Atlanta, Ray and Ann got married, and we were at the ceremony, my wife and I, my wife Elaine. I think Elaine might have even had a part in it, but we're at the ceremony. It's at Dunwoody Country Club. But let's say it's 1985. Senior flight attendant, you can correct me on that if I've got the year wrong, but it's near there. And I was listening very carefully as Raymond is reciting his vows, and I'm thinking, oh, Pom-Pom, you better have your fingers crossed behind your back here, buddy, because there's no way you're going to keep all those promises. I mean, there's just no way. I'm not even sure you understand half of them. In fact, you see, there's something unique about the character of the airline pilot, that contrary to popular opinion, the airline pilot understands and he is fully capable of embracing all of the emotions required for a successful long-term relationship. I'm talking about intimacy, love, compassion, respect. It's just that these qualities don't involve another person. Now that there's funny, folks. You can laugh about that, okay? Love, intimacy, compassion, and respect. The airline pilot has them all. But nonetheless, the marriage kept its primary vow, and that is till death do us part. And you know, I had an old uncle, Leland, who's left us, but he was a Republic pilot. And through Ray's and my conversations, Ray got to know him vicariously, became kind of a friend of both of ours. And Leland lived 2 weeks shy of his 100th birthday, and he never got married. And he said a lot of different things, but one thing that he said was once an adult, twice a child. And the senior flight attendant knows what that means now. So I'm going to give you about 10 seconds in just a moment to give her a hand for the incredible level of commitment, care, and devotion that she afforded to Ray in his declining months. So you give her a hand right now. Well, it turns out that Ray was correct about who lucked out in that Northwest merger, because Eastern continued to struggle, and the beginning of the end came for them with a machinist strike in 1989, and the pilots honored the picket line, and that forced Ray to make the most difficult decision of his professional life. You see, Ray, in his heart of hearts, he was a union man. His dad, I believe, was IBEW, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and Ray was all in for ALPA, the Airline Pilots Association. And his quote to me was, hey, you know, I'm too young to retire and I'm too old to go anywhere. So what do I do? So he made the agonizing decision to cross a picket line and go to work out of self-preservation. But because of who he was and how he was viewed at Eastern Airlines, it was a big deal. One fellow said, regarding Ray, said to Ray, you know, when I'd heard you'd crossed, it was like somebody kicked me in the stomach. It was a big deal, and because I know he agonized over it, I know he did, because his choice was contrary to everything that he held dear. But he made the choice, he went to work, he never looked back, and he never complained, not to me at least. And ultimately, Eastern did go broke in 1991, simply ran out of money and got liquidated. And I want to tell you, I've seen it before with other airlines, so I know the drill, I know the deal. But the social toll, the hardship, the misery, the life disruption, it's just enormous. And it was for thousands and thousands of Eastern employees. And Ray and Ann really just pressed on. I mean, they went from Atlanta to Savannah, where he started with flight safety. And he went from flight safety to Grumman, where he started flying the ultimate business jet, you know, quite a step away from three-holers, and started flying the G5s. And then ultimately got his job, landed his job with United Healthcare in Minneapolis, and moved back up there where he stayed until retirement. The United Healthcare job was a terrific corporate job. And so I would say that out of the tens of thousands of Eastern employees who suffered the loss of their airline, I doubt that there's a handful who weathered the storm and came out the other side any better than Ray and Ann did. So hats off to you for your true grit. You know, we always talked, but we hadn't seen each other in a while. And by now I'm in Florida, and I've made a preemptive strike on retirement. I'm 56 or so, and they've built a lovely home in Atlanta, Ray and Ann have. And they came down for a visit, and of course we're going to play golf. And he's on the practice tee, is Ray, and I watch him swing a golf club. And it was the first time I'd seen him swing a golf club in years, and it was like it was slow motion. You know, I mean, I hadn't seen anything like that from him ever. And I was stunned. I didn't say anything, of course, but I was stunned. And I thought to myself, is this what happens when you retire or what? Well, it turns out that, although Ray didn't know it at the time, that muscles moving in slow motion is one of the symptoms of Parkinson's. And it was diagnosed soon enough, and so began another chapter in Ray's life, in Ray's journey. And so we got in the habit of talking on the phone, right around 5 p.m. I'd call Palmer, and on weekends we'd watch the golf tournaments, the golf broadcasts, and we'd choose up teams, and we'd bet on who's going to win. And we'd bet $100,000 on a regular tournament. We'd bet $500,000 on a major. We wouldn't pay, but we'd bet, and my wife says we could talk about nothing for an hour. It was kind of like Seinfeld, We could just stay on the phone talking back and forth about absolutely nothing, but enjoy it. And as I'd go to hang up, he'd start to ask, when you calling again? And I'd always tell him tomorrow, same time, And when you calling again? Tomorrow, same time. And it was kind of flattering, really, because, who wants to talk to me? Nobody wants to talk to me. My wife doesn't want to talk to me. My kids don't want to talk to me. But Palmer, he wanted to talk to me. And he had the temerity to actually admit it, When you calling again? I'll call you tomorrow. And if I didn't call because I was otherwise obligated, I'd come home and I'd get a voicemail message. I'm worried about you, tragic. If I don't hear from you in an hour, I'm going to call the Manatee County Sheriff's Department. We're going to have the SWAT team over there. He always had a flair for the dramatic. But anyway, we kept calling, we kept talking, and you know what? He did really well for a while. I think he did pretty well for a while anyway. He was able to continue playing golf, which obviously he enjoyed, he loved, and he couldn't play the way he used to play. But they gave him a handicap in the mid-20s, and he was still competitive, and he could play in the regular games at Dunwoody Country Club, and he still enjoyed going out to dinner. And you know how he ordered that filet, well done, butterflied if necessary. He really knew how to ruin a good piece of meat. And then later on, as the disease continued to take its toll, he'd end up in the hospital. And he ended up so many times that I accused him of having diamond medallion status at Northside General in Atlanta, getting free rooms and free upgrades and all that kind of stuff. And he'd go there and he'd terrorize the nursing staff. He would just terrorize them. But he always came home. And now he's in Nashville, and I had an indication that he was going to come home one more time. He was going to come home yet again. But it wasn't to be. Folks, the book of life is short for all of us. And now for Ray, it's been closed. And I want to refer to scriptures one more time on Ray's behalf, because in the book of 1 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul tells us, this is a verse that even I can memorize, by the way, let all things be done decently and in order. And a fair interpretation of that text, according to Bible scholars, not according to me, but according to Bible scholars, is that let everything be done in a fitting and proper manner that is organized, well-planned, courteous, and respectful. And that's the friend that I knew, doing everything decently and in order every single time. I miss those calls at 5 o'clock, and for the rest of my life, I'll miss my friend Ray, who, like thousands of pilots before him, has now flown west for that final check, which we all must take, and I'm sure he passed it with flying colors. May God rest his soul, and may his memory be a blessing to all of those who admired and respected him. Thank you.